December 19th, 1944. Somewhere near Bastogne, Belgium. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold had become even worse. Private Daniel Mercer stood beside a frozen supply road and stared at the empty field kitchen. No smoke, no coffee, no bread, nothing. For 72 hours, his unit had eaten almost nothing. The trucks were gone. The roads were cut off. German artillery had turned every supply route into a graveyard of burning vehicles. Around him, exhausted American soldiers sat in the snow without speaking. Some chewed pieces of leather from old straps. Others melted snow in their helmets and pretended it helped. Nobody complained anymore. That was the part that frightened Mercer. The silence. 3 days earlier, these men had joked, argued, and cursed. Now they simply stared into space. Then Sergeant Walter Briggs walked through the camp carrying a small notebook. His face looked older than it had a week before. "We're out," he said quietly. Nobody answered. "We've counted everything." Still nobody spoke. "There isn't another meal left." The men exchanged nervous glances. Some looked toward the dark forest where German positions waited beyond the snow-covered hills. Others lowered their heads. A young replacement named Tommy Hayes finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "What do we do now?" Nobody had an answer. The wind blew through the camp. The silence returned. And somehow it felt colder than the snow. That afternoon, several soldiers were sent to search abandoned farms nearby. Lieutenant Robert Keller hated giving the order. Military regulations were clear. American troops were not supposed to take food from civilians unless absolutely necessary. But starvation was becoming a battlefield enemy of its own. Hours later, the patrol returned. Their faces looked strange. Not hopeful, not disappointed, just confused. What happened? Soldiers. A church full of starving civilians. Not enough food for both. Yet Patton requested additional details. Then he requested witness statements. Then he requested exact numbers. The officers delivering the information were surprised. There were larger military concerns demanding attention. But Patton kept asking questions. Hours passed. The situation remained unresolved. The soldiers waited. The civilians waited. And hunger continued its work on both. The following evening, a convoy arrived carrying command personnel. Word spread quickly. Patton was coming. Nobody expected that. Many assumed a lower-ranking officer would handle the matter. Instead, the general himself wanted to see it. The camp became strangely quiet. Men stood straighter despite their exhaustion. Vehicles rolled through muddy snow. Then Patton stepped out. His uniform was spotless despite the winter conditions. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no sympathy, no judgment, just focus. The soldiers watched carefully. Patton looked at them one by one. The hollow eyes, the sunken cheeks, the trembling hands. He saw the effects of 72 hours without food. Yet he said nothing. Then he traveled to the church. A translator accompanied him. Inside the basement, dozens of civilians waited. Women, elderly men, children. The smell of sickness filled the air. A little girl sat wrapped in blankets near a candle. Patton stopped when he saw her. The child looked back without speaking. The room remained silent. Everyone waited. Patton paused. Then he slowly walked through the crowd. A mother cradled an infant. An old farmer leaned against a wall. A boy no older than 10 stared at the American officers with frightened eyes. The general observed everything. He asked questions. How much food remained? How many were sick? How long had they been hiding? The answers were grim. When the visit ended, Patton returned to the farmhouse headquarters. Officers immediately gathered around the table. Everyone wanted a decision. The room went silent. Patton stood over the map. His hands rested on the edge of the table. Nobody spoke. Finally, an officer cleared his throat. "Sir." Patton didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room. His voice stayed calm. "How many soldiers can still fight?" The officers exchanged glances. "Most of them, sir." "How many civilians can fight?" Nobody answered. Patton looked down at the map, then back at the men. "We don't leave civilians to starve." One officer shifted uneasily. "Sir, our men haven't eaten in 3 days." Patton nodded. "I know." Another officer spoke. "If supplies don't arrive soon, I know." The room became silent again. Patton paused. Then he pointed toward the road network. "Find every vehicle that can move." "Yes, sir." "Strip non-essential cargo." "Yes, sir." "Redirect emergency rations." Several officers looked shocked. Those supplies were intended for combat units. Patton noticed their expressions. His voice remained steady. If a soldier can still stand, he can wait one more day. Nobody interrupted. Patton continued. If a child can't stand, they don't have that day. The room stayed silent. Nobody argued again. Orders were issued immediately. Drivers were awakened. Mechanics worked through the night. Military police cleared roads. Signal operators transmitted new instructions across the region. The effort was enormous. Not because supplies were plentiful, because they weren't. Every crate mattered. Every ration counted. Every decision carried consequences. The next afternoon, trucks finally appeared on the horizon. Soldiers emerged from tents and foxholes. Many could barely believe what they were seeing. The convoy rolled toward the church first. Some troops watched with confusion. Others watched with understanding. Crates were unloaded. Bread, soup ingredients, medical supplies, milk powder. The civilians began crying before the distribution even started. One elderly woman grabbed the hand of an American medic and refused to let go. A translator later explained what she was saying. Tell them thank you. Again and again. Just those words. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. After the civilians received food, the remaining supplies were distributed among the soldiers. The portions were small, far smaller than anyone wanted. Yet nobody complained. Something had changed. The men had witnessed the choice, and they understood why it had been made. Private Mercer sat beside a cooking fire that evening holding a small bowl of soup. Across the road, he saw children eating for the first time in days. One little boy waved toward the soldiers. Mercer waved back. The moment lasted only seconds, but years later he would still remember it. Not the artillery, not the snow, not even the hunger. That wave. Weeks later, the fighting continued. The war continued. Men were wounded. Others never came home. Yet stories spread through the ranks about what had happened during those 72 hours. The story changed slightly each time it was told. That always happens in war. But one detail never changed. Patton's decision. Many soldiers expected him to choose military necessity. Instead, he chose something harder. Humanity. Years after the war ended, veterans still discussed the incident. Not because it involved a famous battle. Not because it changed the course of history. But because it revealed something important. War constantly pressures people to think only about survival. Only about themselves. Only about their side. Yet sometimes true leadership appears when resources are scarce. Fear is everywhere, and nobody has an easy answer. Patton understood that hungry soldiers could recover. Lost supplies could be replaced. But abandoning helpless civilians would leave a different kind of wound. One that lasted long after the shooting stopped. On that frozen winter week in Belgium, exhausted American soldiers learned a lesson no training manual could teach. Strength was not measured only by how much suffering a person could endure. Sometimes strength was measured by what a person was willing to share while suffering. The snow eventually melted. The roads reopened. The war moved forward. But the memory remained. A starving army. A starving church. A difficult choice. And a general whose calm decision reminded everyone that humanity still mattered, even in the darkest days of World War II. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe.